next story is one of many that are called sometimes the bungling host. This story is about Blue Jay and Bear. It's a Chehalis story. A long time ago, Blue Jay was standing by the river watching all the animals as they work. Now, Blue Jay is the type of person who likes to watch other people work. He doesn't like to work himself, so he was watching them as they worked around the river, and he saw an animal he'd never seen before, and it was very interesting to him. The animal's name was Fishing Duck. Well, Fishing Duck would be sitting in the water. He would flap his brown wings and he would fly high up in the air, and then he would dive under the water and catch a fish. Blue Jay saw this and said, "Wow, that is really cool. I've never seen anything like that before." Well, Fishing Duck did it again. Flapped his little brown wings as fast as he could, flew high up in the air, dove under the water, and caught a fish. Blue Jay said, "That is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I wish I could do something like that." Well, he watched Fishing Duck do it again. Fishing Duck flapped his wings, flew high in the air, dove under the water, and caught a fish. And Blue Jay said, "That is so cool. I wish I... Wait a minute. I have wings. I can fly high in the air. I can do that too." And so Blue Jay stood on the riverbank and started to flap his little blue wings as fast as he could. He flew high up in the air, and he dove down towards the river, but he missed, and he hit his head really hard on the rocks, and he passed out into the water. Now, Blue Jay might have drowned, except someone heard that loud crash and came to investigate. It was his friend Bear. Bear got there, and he saw Blue Jay laying in the river, and he dragged him out, and he shook him, and he said, Blue Jay, what happened?" Blue Jay said, "Oh, I cracked my head on the rocks." Bear said, "Blue Jay, how did that happen?" Blue Jay said, "Well, I was trying to dive in the river like Fishing Duck, only I missed, and ow, I cracked my head on the rocks." Bear said, "Blue Jay, you have to be more careful about who you try to copy. I'm going to take you home and take care of you, Blue Jay, until you feel better." Bear very carefully lifted up Blue Jay and carried him back to Bear's house. He lay him by the fire, put a blanket over him, and even wrapped a bandage around his head. And he said, "Blue Jay, you rest here until you feel better. I'll check on you later." A while later, Bear came back, and he said, "Blue Jay, how do you feel?" Blue Jay said, "Oh, a little better, but my head still hurts." Bear said, "Blue Jay, are you hungry?" Blue Jay said, Yeah, I'm really hungry. What do we have to eat here?" Bear said, "Blue Jay, it's the end of winter. I only have a little bit of dried fish left, but you're welcome to it." So Bear climbed to the rafters of his house, and he brought back a few little pieces of dried fish, and he said, "Here is your dried fish, Blue Jay, but I'm sorry to say I don't have any dipping grease." Now, a long time ago, in every native house on the coast, there were different containers of grease, like whale grease and seal grease and fish grease. And the native people would dip their dried food into it. It would make it easier to chew and taste better. Well, Bear said, "I don't have any dipping grease, but I do have a power I can show you." Blue Jay said, "A power? I wonder what kind of power Bear has." Bear went to another part of the house and got a big clamshell. He brought that clamshell back and he lay it by the fire. Then Bear stood by the fire in the clamshell and clapped his paws together 4 times. And then he put his paws over the fire. Now, if you've ever seen a bear's paws, you know they have pads of fat right on their paws, and the heat from that fire started to soften and then melt the fat in those pads until grease started to drip, drip, drip out of those fatty pads right into the clamshell. Blue Jay saw this and he said, "Wow, that is really cool. I've never seen that before. That is a really cool power." Well, Bear stood there and the grease kept drip, drip, dripping out of his paws right into the clamshell. Blue Jay said, "That is the coolest thing. I wish I could do something like that." After a while, that clamshell was full of grease. Bear picked it up and handed it to Blue Jay and says, "Here is your dipping grease, Blue Jay." Blue Jay took the clamshell, dipped his dried fish into the grease, took a bite and said, "Oh, this is so good. I wish I could do—" "Wait a minute. I have feet. I can stick my feet over— Wait, I can do this too." Blue Jay said, Bear, would you like some dipping grease for your dried fish?" Bear said, "Blue Jay, what are you talking about?" Blue Jay said, "I have powers too, you know." And he went and got another clamshell, and he brought it back to the fire. He lay it down by the fire, he dragged up a chair, and he stuck his feet over the fire. He clapped them together 4 times. And then he stuck his feet over the fire. Well, if you know Blue Jay, he doesn't have pads of fat in his feet. And after a while, it was getting really hot. And then Blue Jay noticed that his legs and his feet were starting to shrivel up. And then he saw that smoke was coming out of his legs. And he said, "Hold on, Bear. Any time now you're going to get some grease. Hold on." But instead of grease coming out of his legs, poof, his legs caught on fire. And Blue Jay jumped up and was screaming, "Ah, ah, ah." His legs were on fire. He tried to put out the fire. It didn't work. He had to hop out of the house to a stream nearby and jump in to put out the fire. And the proof of this story is, have you ever seen a blue jay as it hops around the ground? It has the best hops of all the birds. And the other thing, if you look at blue jay's legs, they're black. They look like burnt pieces of wood. And that's from the time that Blue Jay tried to make grease in Bear's house. And that is all.